Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursaleen, ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in, amma ba'd. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and blessings and salutations on the noblest of prophets and messengers, our leader Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and on his family and on his companions. It's a immense pleasure and honor for me to be visiting the Khalil Center, to be with Sidi Human and Sheikh Bilal, and to be with you here tonight. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the opportunity to be with you. MashaAllah, Sidi Human did an amazing job. I mean, just laying it out, I was enthralled throughout the whole presentation. I have very little to add in terms of sort of fleshing it out. I'll just offer 2 or 3 quick thoughts, and then I really want this to be conversational, inshallah. That way we can sort of make it a dialogue, and we want to. I think that's really beneficial given where we sort of left off right here is the multifaceted nature of the problem. I think it's really important to have multiple voices and then to sort of go deep with each one of these kinds of issues. And I also wanted to just back up a little bit, and I really appreciate the way that Sidi Human began with saying that this is not apologetics. I mean, this is a very timely issue, the first thing. The second is that, within our community there are multiple voices, and one of those voices that's coming out, which we completely want to listen to and respect, is that why is there a burden upon us to have to talk about this? Why do we have to talk about extremism and radicalization? Because the idea is that, and I can't say this as articulately as Sidi Human said, but I think the idea is many Muslims feel beleaguered. They feel sort of, we're getting slammed in so many different ways by the media, by foreign policy people, by elected officials, and if you follow what's going on, and then we need to name this sort of nonsense that's out there. Representative Peter King from New York, who just has this bizarre agenda, has this unbridled hatred and animosity towards Muslims, and uses any opportunity to get in front of a camera and humiliate Islam and humiliate Muslims. And I mean, these are elected officials, and we need to work within the apparatus to sort of, exhibit a voice to say that we push back against that. So I understand that there's Muslims that are like, why is the burden of proof on us? Why do we have to be justifying ourselves or having this conversation? And I get that. I want to say that I completely get that. I think there's multiple levels to this problem, whether it's a foreign policy discussion, whether it's internal discontent, and I'm going to be talking about a little of those things really briefly in a minute. But I think when we look at even our own internal critics, we have to say, we need to have the conversation. Right? The problem isn't going away. We can't put the blame out there and just say it's sort of coming from an external threat, that why is the burden upon us? We're not responsible for it. At the end of the day, it's coming within our community, and we need to understand that. And inshallah, we can get to that point as well. So I want to begin with that. Essentially, and I'm at the risk of oversimplifying it, so please forgive me if I try to do this. I just want to make a quick overview of this. Is that, from my perspective, I'm not a scholar of deen. I'm not a psychologist, and so I'm so happy we have those voices. I work as a chaplain with young Muslims. I work with 18 to 25-year-olds on a regular basis. And I think that's important, and that's an important voice to look at, because that's where some of this discontent is coming from. Essentially, when you look at the experiences that people are having and that are talking about this, it's that it really goes down to a sense of disconnection. And I'm not saying that to oversimplify it, but to say that, once you unpack what does it mean to be disconnected, to be dislocated. There's a dislocation in that, where's my identity? Is it, as a Muslim, do I belong to this society? Do I have any social currency and social citizenship? Because there's legal citizenship, and Dr. Sherman Jackson talks eloquently about this. There's a sense of having a legal citizenship, and then there's a sense of having a social citizenship. And many of us may have the privilege of having a legal citizenship within the United States, but we don't enjoy, in certain communities, in certain senses, in certain halls of power, a sense of social citizenship. There's always a second guessing. Do you really belong here? You're not one of us. You don't have a connection to this community, to this tradition, to America, whatever America means, whatever the West means, like we do, right? And you look at who's saying those kind of statements. And I think that sense of dislocation can be very profound. It can be very unsettling for young Muslims. Is that, do I really belong here? I mean, my parents come from some perhaps ethnic heritage, or I racially don't fit into sort of what is a mainstream quote-unquote idea of what being American is. And I mean, all of these things can be unpacked and need to be deconstructed, etc. But the problem is, we live in a world of images. And while you and I can have academic talks about this stuff, we live in a world in which 330 million Americans are being exposed and bombarded with certain images. And you know where I'm going with this, is that there's an idea of what an American is, what a real American is, and then there's all you other people who sort of hang out over here, right, because we allow you to. And I mean, we need to be very real. That's, I think, when you go to the extreme, the fringes of the right, in the culture wars and the political discourse, that's the language that's coming out. And it's quite scary. And there's a wonderful report. This is tangentially related, but I definitely encourage people to read it. There's a friend of mine, Wajahat Ali, who's a lawyer. He's a lawyer by training. He actually works for Al Jazeera now. He's a journalist. He works for Al Jazeera as a stream. And he wrote a report several years ago. I think it came out in 2011. And you can look it up. I encourage you to Google it. You can read it in, it's like 40 pages, 50 pages. And it's called Fear Inc. Fear Inc. as in F-E-A-R, Inc. I-N-C, dot. And the idea is that there is an entire industry, and we need to recognize this, there's an entire industry of funders, people that give millions of dollars, and it's well over $40 million that have, when they did the report several years ago, of all money that's traceable. There's funders, there are content producers, and then there's content providers, right? So certain people pay for this, certain people produce the content, which is xenophobic, which is Islamophobic, which is very jingoistic in some senses, and then those content producers give it to content providers, which, for example, is like Fox News, right? And they're ill. And other people that have a unabashed agenda to sort of send a certain message out. Why am I saying this? Is that because if you and I live in communities, and we live in a society in which when you go to the grocery store, and you go to the auto mechanic shop, and you go to places, and this is the kind of thing that average people that are going about their average daily business are being, exposed to again and again, when you're bombarded with these images, there's a point in media theory in which perceptions become realities, right? What you say about someone long enough eventually begins to sink in. Now here's why that's a problem. It's a problem externally because there's people out there that when they hear, and you can just fill in the blank, and you just make word associations, Islam, Sharia, jihad, violence, belligerence, incompatible with the West, backwards, primitive, belligerent, anti-modern, anti-Western, etc., etc. You just fill like blah, blah, blah airwaves with that again and again, and that just becomes like this cloud, right, that people are exposed to. That's one problem, is that these are your and my neighbors that are sort of being exposed to this. Another problem is that there's people that are suffering from this disconnection, young people, who are dislocated. They're looking for belonging. And at some level, people are beginning to internalize this. And Sidi Human can talk about this much better than I can, of what happens, what are the psychological processes when people begin to internalize this self-hatred. That I'm so upset and angry at the world, that then I become so upset and angry at myself, and it becomes this inferno, right, that's burning within people. And they need strategies on how to deal with this. And some of the work that I've seen and that I've read, that I've experienced, is that unfortunately people that fall into extremist tendencies and that become radicalized have maladaptive tendencies. They don't know how to process this. They don't know how to deal with it. And so, and I'm just going to tell you a quick story, because I tell a lot of stories, as my friends know, and maybe more stories will come out later. But to just tell you how average this works, right? So I do a lot of interfaith work. It's just a part and parcel of my job. So I was doing an interfaith event like 2 years ago, and I was on a panel, and there was a female pastor, and she came up, before the panel started. She said, I just want to share a story with you. And I said, okay. And she said, I work in a town, and it wasn't very far from where I was. And she says, one of my congregants, one of my parishioners, someone from my community came to see me. And he came to see me in confession, and he was talking to me and said, I'm really torn. And she said, why? What's the matter? And he said, this is the man talking now, that every day I go to work and I stop by for a cup of coffee and I get a sandwich at a gas station on my way to work. And there's a Pakistani man that owns it. And with all this crazy nonsense going on in Pakistan and Taliban and this and that, I'm just really struggling inside because I don't want to go to this guy anymore. And she says, why not? What's the problem? She says, well, I don't know if I can trust this guy. If by my spending, that $1.50 on my sandwich and my coffee and that kind of stuff, he might be sending money over to the Taliban. And I might be aiding and abetting, terrorism. Okay? So I don't want anything to do with this. But I also feel bad because he's a nice guy. He smiles when I walk in and says, how's your day? And all of this. So, no, look at what's going on here. This man is torn inside, right? Because he's been exposed to this, boogeyman image of Pakistanis and the Taliban and all this kind of stuff out there. And he's struggling with it, being like, well, I know him, he's a decent guy, but I don't know what to do. And now he's sort of opening up to this to his pastor to share this. So she shared the story with me to be like, I just want you to know that this is kind of day to day for some people. They're struggling with these kind of things, and I'm sure you have many stories like that of your own. So I think I want to sort of make it real in a sense of this is what so many of us are facing. Right? The last point that I want to leave with, and then inshallah we'll open it up to conversation, we want to hear from Sheikh Bilal, is, so, when our young people are struggling with this idea of disconnection and dislocation and alienation and marginalization, right? These are problems. I mean, these are real serious issues, and they manifest in different ways. One of them is that people feel they don't have community, and this is what I want to end with, is that, part of the title of the program is Proposed Solutions. Inshallah, we can hopefully come to a better collective understanding of that. One of the things that I want to put forward is we need to look long and hard in ourselves, right? For those of us that are in the field, right? That are working with Islamic organizations, with masajid, with non-profits, and building healthy families and healthy communities. What are the problems within our community? Why are we having communal disintegration? Why can't we get to a sense where we build a communal collective spirit? Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. I mean, look at the beauty of and just the profundity of the prophetic paradigm of what the Prophet did, and that's the strategy that we look to. When you look at how difficult he struggled, how long he struggled within his community to get to that point. That's why we look to our scholars. We look to the people that have that experience and that knowledge, and we, that we get to a sense of, it's not going to happen overnight, but we need to make forward progress to building healthy communities. Because from my point of view, I mean, I don't have the best perspective on this from where I'm sitting. The young people that I see that are really struggling, the common thread that comes up again and again is they say, I don't belong. I can't go to this community. I can't go to that masjid. I can't see myself fitting with these kinds of people. And so the idea there that we need to broaden the understanding of what it means to build a community. And inshallah, I'll leave it there, and hopefully this can spark and open up the doors, inshallah, to a conversation. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.